Since my dad died, I make sure I don't cry in front of my preschooler. I just don't want him to be sad.
Well, we never talked about death, but I turned out fine, so we just don't talk about it.
I figure I'd just take the pictures down of Nana for a while. Being reminded of her will only upset my son more.
I think the word die is too scary. I told my daughter that my sister went to sleep.
I would never take my child to a funeral. She doesn't understand anyway.
Preschoolers are too little to even realize what's going on.
I've just been making sure that he's really busy. Then he won't have any time to think about Grandpa.
My teenager doesn't talk about his dad anymore. I'm so glad he's over that.
I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong, so I won't say anything at all.
I feel so alone.
I feel so alone.
I feel so alone.
So alone.
I feel so alone.
Good evening. I'm Marcie Taylor, as you heard in the introduction, and I came into this field in a way that I would never have expected to do so. We were vacationing in the Outer Banks, and a vacation should be a really happy, fun thing. We were there for a colleague's wedding. The first few days we were there, it was rainy. We finally had a gorgeous sunny day. We said, hey, let's go to the beach. And that's all Drew wanted to do. It's, can we go to the beach? Can we go to the beach now? When are we going to the beach? And the problem was the trolleys that came through our area were full because we had waited a little bit later in the morning. I couldn't find his sunscreen anywhere, so I had to wait till my husband came back. He was out working out. And all the trolleys were full. And a lady leaned out the balcony and said, if you're waiting for a trolley, you'll be waiting all day. You should just drive. Well, we didn't realize, but there were two exits out of our condo area, and we took the upper exit, and Randy said to the guard, he said, I hear there's a beach around here somewhere, and the guy said, oh, that's about a mile down. Well, here we didn't go out the trolley exit, we went out the upper exit, and regrettably an improperly loaded logging truck lost control of its load in that 1 mile that it should have taken to get to the beach, and our life was forever altered. My son was flown out that day on a helicopter to Norfolk, Virginia. I broke my neck, my pelvis, and my arm. I was stabilized in the Outer Banks before getting flown up to Norfolk as well. And as soon as I came in, they basically told me my child was not going to make it. He was too severely brain injured. And we held him as he passed away. That we actually feel we were lucky because some parents do not get to be with their child. But it changed the course of our lives, and we had a lot of time to think, and we thought, how do we make sense of this? You know, how do you answer the why in this happening? And we realized you can't, but we decided to basically make something positive come out of our tragedy. If my child could not live, then other children were going to benefit. So we decided to start a foundation in his name. You can see the name, the Drew Michael Taylor Foundation, but we didn't know much about foundations except that Bill Gates had a really big one. So we're like, well, what shall our mission be? So our original mission seemed to be to save the world because we were going to give out awards and scholarships and run this program, that program. And over the years, we've pretty much honed it into what became glaringly important for us. And I'll tell you why it was so important with a little story. But before I turn to the next slide, a certification in thanatology, I left teaching, as Debbie said, to devote myself to being a full-time foundation person, but also to be a stay-at-home mom, which was the best job ever. We were very blessed after Drew passed away to have another child. So we have a huge span in ages, but my teenager usually acts like she adores her little brother. And I think deep down she does, some days more than others. But I went back to school because, you know, my life experience was as a bereaved parent. But through the program that I'm going to tell you about, Drew's Hope, we were reaching lots of other people, and they weren't all bereaved parents. They were bereaved spouses. They were bereaved grandparents. They were people that had lost cousins and nieces and nephews and friends, and how could I relate to them? So I was blessed to find a program called the Thanatology Program at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, and thanatology is the study of death and dying. And it looks at end-of-life and bereavement issues. So I did go back to school to get some training in that area so I could speak more knowledgeably about my life experience. This was my son. This is my son, Drew Michael Taylor. This was a picture actually taken the day before he died. We had a jacuzzi hot tub, and it had those jets in it, and we filled it with bubbles because we couldn't get to the beach. And we have this awesome video of him standing up, coated head to toe in bubbles, saying, "Look at me, I'm a snowman." But in this picture, I love it because he also looks like a cherub angel in the clouds. You wouldn't even know those were all bubbles. So we started a foundation in his name. And of course, like everyone, we're trying to use lots of social media to get our word out. Our foundation actually operates out of my house. My den is my office, and we use space in schools to run our grief programs. And why, you might wonder, did we go from saving the world to grief programs? Well, it's our own little corner of the world. There was a little girl whose brother had died over the summer, and she went back to school. And she came home one day, and she said to her parents, "I tried to talk about my brother on the playground to my friends, but they all changed the subject." Well, that little girl was my daughter, Lauren. She was 6 and turned 7 exactly a week after the accident that killed her brother. As a bereaved parent, it takes every ounce of energy for your own grief. It's like holding on to a life raft in the middle of an ocean. I didn't have energy to bring her or my husband onto the life raft with me. And a lot of bereaved parents will explain that same thing. It really took a village to raise my kid because I didn't have the energy for her. And I knew when she said that, I needed to find support for her. My husband and I were very lucky. When I was recuperating in the hospital, a social worker said, there's a local bereaved parent support group that you guys could go to. And we ran to that. They recommend support groups 4 to 6 months out minimum from a loss, because in the beginning you're in that acute grief stage. You have to own your own grief. You have to deal with your own feelings. It can be very overwhelming to go into a group setting with lots of other grievers, but we ran to it. We needed that for us, and that's what you'll find out about grief. Everybody grieves their own way, their own timetable, and they have to find what works for them. Experts say wait 4 to 6 months. We were there within 6 weeks. We would have been there with less, but I surprised my brother and went to his nursing school graduation in Jersey in my neck brace with my cane, not being very comfortable, but we realized with the accident how important family was. So we had found this tremendous bereaved parent support group. It was the one place where people could, in some small way, understand our loss. And boy, is that empowering, to surround yourself with people that get it. Now, they didn't totally get it. They didn't know my kid. I didn't know their kid. But only a parent can relate to another parent who has lost a child to understand the magnitude of that loss. So we wanted to find something similar for our daughter. So I started doing research, and I found 2 local options. Highmark Caring Place, I'll give the shout out to Terry over here, in Lemoyne, was about 55 minutes from Shippensburg on a school night with a young child. Olivia's house in York, and they've now since expanded to Hanover, was an hour and a half from our house. Still not really convenient, but you know what? As a parent, you sometimes have to do what you don't necessarily want to do for your kid, and we were not letting distance nor the cost of gas, which at the time was about $4 a gallon, we were not letting that prevent us from seeking that help that we felt our daughter so desperately needed. So we went to the Highmark Caring Place, and we loved it. I believe it's a 10-session program. It was every other week. On a weeknight, they served dinner, followed by separate activities for kids based on their age, and then for parents based on their type of loss. And our daughter started opening up. I mean, she did this T-shirt, and I could just see through what she was creating that finally she had a safe place to talk. She didn't have to worry about making us sad. We were in a different room. They weren't going to tell us what she said. There was confidentiality there, and it was very empowering for her. And I said to the directors at Highmark Caring Place, I said, I found what we need to do in our area. I found our foundation's mission. Can I beg, borrow, and steal your ideas? Because we need a program like this. Just because you live in a rural area like Shippensburg doesn't mean that you should have to travel an hour to get grief support. So God bless them. They said, beg, borrow, and steal all the ideas you want. You guys are in a black hole for children's grief services in your area. So we approached Shippensburg University, and we said, hey, we're both teachers. My husband was a social studies teacher in Greencastle at the time. I was at Chambersburg. We said, we're both teachers, and we know that education majors need hours, like observation hours and things like that. Would your counseling students perhaps need some hours that they might want to facilitate our support groups? They jumped on board. And Dr. Shirley Hess, who has since passed away, she died of cancer 2 years ago, she started the program with us, and it has been amazing. We started in the fall of 2008. I think at the time we had 5 or 6 families. We thought there'd be more, but we've had as low as 5. We've had as high as 16 over the past 5 years. We started Drew's Hope because we knew that families in our area deserved the same experience we had at Highmark Caring Place. You need to have a program that's in a drivable distance that your family can take advantage of when these situations happen. So in our case, we cannot offer 10 sessions. We need to go on a college semester calendar. Like I said, we use graduate level counseling students as our support group facilitators. The rule is they had to have had the grief and loss class or the group class, but it's amazing training for them. Did you know that a lot of counselors can get through their counselor training and never have had a grief and loss class? That shocked me. I had no idea until I took my thanatology coursework. The first class was Principles of Mourning and Counseling the Bereaved, and at the end of the course, the professor said, congratulations, you now know more about grief and loss than 90% of counselors do. And I looked at him like, what? And we did find out. You don't have to take a grief and loss class in many of the counseling coursework. And that, I thought that was sort of scary. So what we see with Drew's Hope is this amazing win-win. Our community is getting this free program that we fund, but the graduate level counseling students are getting firsthand experience with grieving families. They get comfortable with grief and loss. And I said, I don't know why you wouldn't be comfortable with it to begin with. You can't fix it. You can't bring their loved one back. Pressure off. If someone comes to you with addiction, you either fix the addiction or you don't. But if somebody comes to you and they're grieving, you can't bring their loved one back. Ultimately, you can't fix it. So what can you do? You can listen, and you can help them adjust to their new normal. And that's a lifetime. There's no end process to it. And I guess as a counselor, you sort of probably want to see, I fixed it. Yes, I can sign them out of here. Well, you can't do that with grief. Society would love to believe that grief has an end. Oh, you've been through all the first. You got through that year. Now you're back to normal. You're the old person you were before the loss, and we find that that is definitely not the case. I like to use the phrase, grief is a journey. Don't get stuck in the parking lot. And basically, once you start driving, you just got to keep going. And you're going to have off-ramps and detours and rest areas, but really it is a journey, and you just keep going on it throughout your entire life. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of my son. I carry him with me. I carry him with me internally. I carry him with me symbolically. This is his birthstone. This is my Drew ring. Every time I do a speaking engagement, a support group, it's his birthday, it's my birthday, I'll wear it. It's my link to him. We call these linking objects. It's some physical, tangible thing that links us to our loved one. And that's why I hate when I hear that families put everything away, got rid of everything. And you need sometimes to keep things. Maybe not everything, but there's always something that you can attach to that really keeps you connected with that loved one. So Drew's Hope, we'll get back to, I like to do these little asides because I'm very passionate about this topic, as you'll probably tell by the end of the speech. But in our case, we do a 7-session program. We do have an orientation night as well, which would technically make it 8. Just like Highmark Caring Place, we offer dinner first, very simple dinners, pizza, sandwiches. After all, we're on a budget. We offer then support groups. So 6 to 6:30 is dinner, 6:30 to 8 is a support group. We divide kids by age, and we're very flexible in that because we really don't know how many families that we're going to get. And then if we have enough adults, we will divide up by type of loss, with loss of a child being one group, loss of a spouse being another, and then the other would be a mixed loss group. Again, a lot of lessons that we learned from other local grief centers. It's a pretty common practice. In our case, though, we are a rather small area, so we don't always get the numbers, but our last spring 2014 group was amazing. There were only 6 of them that regularly showed up. They now have their own Facebook group called You Just Got to Talk About It. They've had their own family picnic that they invited me to. I was very blessed to go to that just the other week. I mean, they have bonded, and they all had different losses. Several of them had lost parents. Some of them had lost children. At the end of the day, it didn't really matter. It's that they had people to talk to when especially their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues didn't get it. They didn't understand. But when they came to Drew's Hope, they found like-minded people who were also grieving, who would listen to them, who would give them all the time they need, and who would say, it's normal. What you're feeling is completely normal. And that's very empowering to learn, because grief makes you feel so isolated. I'm the only one that could possibly have these feelings, when in fact they found at Drew's Hope a lot of other people are thinking the same thing. We do have a curriculum. Like each week we have an intended idea. Maybe 1 week is feelings, 1 week telling your grief story. And then we have suggested activities for our facilitators to do each week. But we will tailor that. After each session, we gather all of the facilitators together. After all, in our case, they are graduate level counseling students. They're still learning. A trained counselor is in that debriefing, and we talk about how the group went. What are we getting from the parents' point of view? What are the kids saying? Okay, it sounds like you have a lot of angry kids in your group. Can we maybe do this activity for next time that will help them find a physical outlet for their anger? So we do tailor the program to meet the needs of the participants, but we do have a structured curriculum that we use going in, but we're flexible within that structure. One unique thing that we do, we got this idea from Olivia's house, we offer family fun outings. One of the hardest things to do as a grieving family is have fun again and not feel guilty about it. So we offer family fun outings. We've taken our families to Harrisburg Senators games. One of our kids got to throw out the first pitch. Our kids were out on the field for the Star Spangled Banner. We've gone to clowning shows at our local Lourdes Performing Arts Center. When you can have fun and you know that all the other people around you that are laughing have also experienced loss, it's a good feeling because it says it's okay. They're laughing. I can laugh too. It's okay to have hope in my life. It's okay to have fun again. The summer after a child completes our program, we also offer summer camp scholarships. Many of our families are socioeconomically disadvantaged and would not be able to afford outings like this, would not be able to afford to send their kids to summer camp. We want kids to get out of sort of that atmosphere of grief and engage, re-engage in many cases in the world again. We want them to have fun, positive experiences that says you can have fun again. Life can be good again, and we will help you do that. We are excited that after 5 years at the Shippensburg University location that we are expanding to Greencastle. We've realized that there's just a need to our southwest into Hagerstown. There are no programs for grieving kids, so we are going to be expanding our geographic reach, which we're quite excited about. Some of the activities that, if you are working with students who are grieving that you could do, let's say you can't get to one of these grief centers, you're in a situation like I was in the beginning, there are still lots of activities that you can do with kids. We do memory boxes. This is actually one of Lauren's boxes. We were at the beach. Notice the seashells in the sand, her brother's name, his initials, and then in the box there's rocks in there. We give out rocks with like hope and things. They're smooth, they're shiny. It's something tangible that the kids can hold on to. We have a mask project that we do, and you can find explanations for most of these on Pinterest in just common grief books for kids. Our mask activity, we did an art show with our local gallery to show some of the things that we do. And on the outside of the mask, you can ask a child, what do you show the outside world? What do people see? What are you willing to sort of present? And in some cases, it's just happy faces. In some cases, it's plain. The one person looks like half a Hulk. The other person is blue, the sadness of it, and then the other part is sort of blank. But on the inside of the mask, I know it's sort of hard to see, but it's sort of skeleton looking, and there's lots of words there. And those words are anger, confusion, anxiety, all the feelings that they keep inside, that they internalize, that they can't show to other people, go on the inside of that mask. It's a very symbolic activity for them. We also do, and this is actually something I did in my bereaved parents group. This is a great one for kids, a collage activity. This was actually the one I did for Drew. You just put a ton of magazines in front of people. We had a butterfly shape cut out because of Children's Grief Awareness Day, which is always the third Thursday in November. It's an initiative of Highmark Caring Place. We had all of our bereaved parents create butterfly collages. And it was neat watching the interaction around the table. Can anybody find me a Converse sneaker? Oh, hey, you guys have a black lab, don't you? I found a lab. Do you want that? What words do you need? And they were really helping each other. But while they were doing it, they were able to share what was important to me, what was important to my child. It's a really great way to bring up memories for kids, because kids, all the memories, you look through a magazine and it jogs things. Oh, wait, I remember when I worked in the garden with Pappy, let me cut out that tomato. Oh, wait, I remember we loved Scooby-Doo, and they'll cut out the words and things like that. So collages are a very easy, very cheap way to do things. Now, in our case, we actually then painted inexpensive canvases in our child's favorite color or something that was meaningful to us, and then I just used Mod Podge, and it made a really nice seal on that so they could keep it forever. So the New York Life Foundation partnered with the National Alliance for Grieving Children, and now this one's specifically going to be about surviving parents, but a lot of these statistics can apply to grief in general. 3/4 of parents say there are not enough resources to help grieving kids. And we found that in our case, especially in rural areas, you're very underserved trying to find grief resources. About 1/3 say kids do not do as well in school as before and are getting in more trouble than they used to, which you can probably guess. Grief takes hold of everything. Grief is the most important thing. I was the teacher, and I didn't really care what was going on in the classroom. I can't imagine what a grieving kid would think. I tried to act like I was frustrated with some of the kids when they didn't do their work, but I'm thinking, I don't even want to grade this homework. Do I really care that you didn't do it? So I figured if as a teacher I wasn't into it, I could totally see where kids are struggling as well. 4 in 10 parents say their child's school was not well prepared to help their children deal with loss. They've actually done other surveys with teachers, and the amount of teachers that say their schools are more concerned about the school dress code than they are about grieving kids, the numbers are just overwhelming. Schools are so overburdened these days with everything else that they have to do that things like grief, they're just not on the forefront. But the problem is things like grief infiltrate every aspect of a child's life, including their school performance. So, we're so worried about testing. Oh, I don't want those grief group people to come in and take up my valuable class time because we got to pass that state test. Well, your kid's not passing the state test if they're not listening to what you're saying, because all they can think of is dad died. We need to take care of the grief for other things to fall into place. More than 3/4 of parents say it's hard to know what's normal kid behavior and what's grief related, so we're going to tap into some of those ideas in a little bit. More than half of parents agreed that most adults don't know how to talk to me or my kids when we run into them. And I remember being at the hospital, still in the ER after Drew died, and I looked at my husband and I said, well, now I'm one of them. And he sort of looked at me. I said, I never wanted to be that person. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I said, now we're the parents of the dead kid. I said, now we're the people that people act like they don't see you at the end of the grocery store aisle. They put their head down and they scurry to the next aisle so they don't have to talk to you. Well, how would I know that unless I'd done it myself? You don't know what to say to grieving people. You avoid them. And then they feel like more of an outcast. It's not bad enough. My kid died. Now nobody wants to talk to me because nobody knows what to say. But I knew right away when the accident happened, I said, now we're those people. We're no longer Randy and Marcie Taylor, Shippensburg, PA, with the 2 beautiful kids and the wonderful house and the great jobs. We're now the parents of the dead kid. And that's how we were pretty much known. Oh, their child died. And then it's the judgment, and then it's the questions. Well, how did that accident really happen? Well, this happened, did that happen? I mean, all the articles in the paper had something wrong. One of the radio reports said that I had died. I was a local teacher. That wasn't good. I was a local high school teacher. So, a lot of people, they don't know what to say to you, and a lot of people will not say a thing at all. We've learned that some friends in these situations, some people step forward, some stand still, some step back. And through this, we've made friends that we never thought we'd make, but we've lost friends we never thought we'd lose. And some people are just sort of drifting along in the midst of it all, and that's okay too. At least they're still there. So let's get into a little bit myths of children and grief. A lot of people think that young kids don't grieve. Well, we've actually worked with families. Kids young as 2.5 have participated in our programs. We will offer childcare to even younger because we feel it's so important for the families to be there, and we don't want them to have to find daycare, and if they can't, we don't want them not to come. So we will provide it, but we have had kids as young as 2.5 go into our groups very successfully. They might not be able to verbalize, but give them some crayons. It's amazing what they can tell you, what they can express to you about their loss. Bereaved children do not grieve as deeply as adults. Bereaved children grieve. They grieve very deeply, but they grieve in a different way. You know, they always say that you can only sit something like as many minutes and listen as your age or something like that. Well, kids can grieve, but they can grieve in short little spurts, and then they go out and play, and then they come back and ask another question, and then they go and play. Their brain just can't process things as deeply as an adult. It doesn't mean they're not grieving. Yes, they look happy. They're out on the playground, but they're a kid. You know, that physical energy has to go somewhere, and play really is a child's grief work. Bereaved children should be protected from death. I had a mom call. She had a stillborn little girl, and she called me a few weeks later. She said, I need some help. I'm not sure what to do with my son. And I said, okay. She said, well, okay, I have 2 sons. She said, one's 6, the other's 10. After my daughter was born, everybody told me it probably wouldn't be a good idea for the kids to see their sister. So we didn't bring them to the hospital. My son's really angry with me. And I'm thinking to myself, no kidding. But I had to say, you did the best you could with the information you were given at that time. We can't go back and undo anything here. Let's talk about how we can help your kid moving forward. But he was so angry, and I thought he had every right to be. And who were these well-intentioned, uninformed people? Where's the one family picture that family ever would have had with all their kids together? You know, it's really hard to grieve what you don't see. There's actually a study that said if a bereaved parent cannot view the body, their grief can be delayed for up to 10 years. That's especially the case with the servicemen. You know, their bodies aren't really there to grieve or not intact enough to grieve, and you can't believe it because you can't see it with your own eyes. Well, think of a child. The baby's coming, the baby's coming, the baby's coming. All of a sudden, there's no baby. I think he had a right to be angry. He never got to meet his sister. So I'm hoping that they had photographers there to share. We did talk about that. Let them see the picture, take them to the gravesite, those types of things. They never did come to our program, though. You can't make people come through your door. But she was willing to pick up the phone and call, and I think that was a good first step. Sometimes it's just telling them what the resources are, but you can't always drag them through the door. Children are very resilient. They can quickly forget about loss, resolve grief, and get on with life. Like I said, grief's a journey. For many children, they're going to re-grieve for the rest of their life. As they hit different developmental stages, they will re-grieve the loss. So they may be resilient at that time for a time, but then a grief trigger will come along. They need to be allowed to grieve at that time. They don't quickly forget it. It might seem that way to adults because they can't process as deeply or for as long or at our intellectual level, but the grief is there. Children understand, experience, and express grief in an identical manner. Children are the same as adults. Everybody grieves differently in their own timetable. There's even a book, I think it's called something like Grief is a Snowflake. Every snowflake's different. Every grief experience is different. So what is grief? Grief is a normal, healthy reaction to loss. Hoping you can see the picture. This is artwork, and it was done by a 4-year-old named Seth. Cute little guy. He never knew his brother. His brother died before Seth was born, but he's heard a lot about his brother. He knows that Drew was killed in a car accident. So one day, out of the blue, I'm watching this little Seth, who is my son, draw this picture, And I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my gosh, I think I know what that is. But let's let him verbalize this. Honey, what's that picture of? That's my brother Drew going up to heaven after the car accident. He was 4. So you think kids don't know? They know a lot, and they can express a lot. He tells me when I grow up, I'm going to make a remote control so I can, a remote control and it'll bring people back from heaven, and then I can play with my brother, and we're going to go in a plane, and we could get Drew, and then I could play with him, and then we could come back. A lot of magical thinking goes on there, but powerful. But again, you give them a means to express it. They're not always going to talk to you. But often, they will draw things, and if you can, sit with them and talk them through. So what does this mean, and what do you think about that? Because sometimes you'll actually find like they have the magical thinking can be very wild ideas. Well, this is a picture of such and such, and I know I caused Pappy to die because I was so mad at him when he yelled at me, and I thought to myself, I wish he would die, and then he did. You can't tell how many stories of kids, they have these thoughts or they say things, especially like babies. Well, mom and dad's attention is now all with the baby. I wish they weren't here anymore. And then a SIDS death occurs. What type of grief is that child experiencing? So to let kids process, grief itself is normal. Grief itself is healthy. But because society is not comfortable with it, they often just sort of, they don't want to necessarily explore. They don't want to necessarily let kids talk, let kids, some parents would see that and we don't draw stuff like that. And they'd crumple it up and throw it away. He needs to express that. He never knew his brother. He never met his brother. He knows him through videos. He knows them through pictures. What about the families that put all the pictures away? How sad. It's his brother. Doesn't matter that he never met him. He's always going to be his brother. We have kids that come to our grief group. They never met their dad. Dad died before they were born. Now they're 6, 7, 8 years old, and their school has donuts with dad. Do you think that child's going to re-grieve a loss? Even if they never knew the dad, they understand other people have dads. I don't. They're grieving that loss of a relationship that they think they should have. And I think that's where I thought, why do we have muffins with mom and donuts with dad? Can't we have pastries with parents? Or, something else? Do you have to have a daddy-daughter dance, or could you have a family ball? I was a high school language teacher. One of our big things is the family tree project. Now, long before Drew died, I knew how many kids come from single-parent homes, or, you have this step and that half and all these other things. Do kids, especially middle and teenagers, do they want to announce to everybody that their family's not the normal nuclear family, or that somebody died? Not always. So what did I let them do? Well, I said, okay, if you don't want to do your family tree, you can do a fantasy family tree. If you want to make Beyonce your spouse, go for it. If you want to pick the coolest grandparents in the world, go for it. As long as you label it with 10 Spanish words covering 10, different terms, I don't care. After all, I want them to learn family vocab. I don't want to traumatize them forever. And I think that's where, as a society, if we open our mind to say, okay, I've never had a loss, but what if I did? How would I feel about this project or this activity or this school event? Can we be a little more empathetic, I guess the word would be, to our students? So some of the things that help children grieve are the actual number one thing. We're talking about how do we help kids. Well, sometimes the way to help kids is to help their parents. The functioning level of the surviving parent is one of the best indicators of how a child will do on their grief journey after a parent has died. So if you can help the parent, bring them a meal, offer to care for their child. I know in my case, even though it wasn't a surviving parent, but Randy and I were so enveloped in our own grief, we had to reach out to other people to help us with our daughter. She got taken to things that we would have never done with her in any case. People took her camping. I like hotels. People took her to the demolition derby. Wasn't usually what I did on a Friday night, but she got taken to all these great experiences by really great, well, actually the people that took her, we didn't even know them that well, and it took me I just thanked them, I think, last spring. I said, you have no idea what that meant when you took our daughter to do stuff because we were too enveloped in our own grief to do anything with her. Family cohesiveness is a major factor in reducing lowered self-esteem and limiting acting out behaviors. And the problem is, in a lot of families, the grief takes every small dysfunction and blows it up into major proportions. That's a tough one, but if you, again, help the parents, help the family, try to not be the one sort of, turning the knife into people's back in the midst of it, be the peacemaker, because that will help the kids as well. If it was a suicide, Dad hurt himself, but he did that because he was very sick. You don't have to go into all the little gory details of how Dad hurt himself, but the thing is, kids are observant. What if they overhear somebody saying exactly what happened? And you've asked everybody, don't tell them. We had a family come in. We don't want her to know that her mom completed suicide. Okay, well, here's the problem. And she can't be in the same group as her cousin that's her same age because the cousin knows what happened, and we haven't told her. So if you could split them up into groups, at some point that cousin's going to be totally telling what happened. And then the kid will say, well, nobody's being honest with me. Now who can I trust? Now who can I talk to? Be honest as you can and make sure everybody in your circle is on the same page with whatever story's being told. Doing good? Oh, okay. All right. I love Alan Wolfelt. If any of you have ever heard of him, he's a grief guru is pretty much how I'd explain that. These next common age-related grief reactions are from his book called Healing the Bereaved Child. Infants and toddlers can actually understand loss, but they see it as an absence. Their primary caregiver is not available. And if you've ever been, especially like a nursing mom, and left your kid for the first time with somebody else and they tried to give them a bottle, it doesn't go real well. Well, what if that mom has died? It's not going to go real well for quite a while. Somebody is glaringly absent, and this is a new adjustment that child will have to make, no matter how tiny they are. Some typical grief responses would be I'm upset behaviors, more crying and things like that, changes in normal sleeping and eating behaviors, just fussiness. What can you do? Just comfort them. That's about all you can do. Offer your physical comfort, and you really just have to, again, though, try to adhere to some type of routine as you're adjusting to this new normal. The preschoolers, now this is preschoolers, but that goes into early elementary. Death is viewed as temporary or reversible, and can you blame them? Have you ever watched a cartoon? How many times do cartoon characters get killed and they just pop back up to life? Nobody ever really dies. It just, well, maybe in Lego Star Wars, I'm not sure, but you remember back to the old Wile E. Coyotes and those types of things. I mean, anvils falling on their heads from cliff heights, and everybody seems to be okay, and they bounce back to the next day. Well, is it any wonder that kids see death as something temporary? So their typical grief response, they may not understand these new feelings. They may not be able to verbalize them. They may ask the same questions about the death over and over and over again, and we found in many cases kids are just trying to catch you telling them something different. They need to be able to trust you. That's why it's good to tell the truth, because if you forget what you told them because you were telling a half-truth or a total and complete lie, I would think the 50th time when you get really frustrated and you just throw up your hands and say, all right, fine, here's what happened. And then their whole, again, that universe comes crashing down because it's not that consistent place that they thought it was. But they will keep asking. They want that reinforcement. They want to try to make some sense and put some control into the chaos that they're feeling. What can you do? Provide them with terms for their feelings. Answer concretely and lovingly. Be honest. Death play. Some kids will act out, sort of the situation that happened, and that's actually okay. Again, they're trying to make sense of it. You can actually join in and then sort of guide it in a positive way. Short-term regression, some kids will lose their potty training, like they were potty trained and then all of a sudden they're not. They were sleeping through the night, now they're not. Those types of things are actually pretty normal, but as long as you remain that consistent, have presence and support for them, they will usually come back on track at some point. And then we have our grade schoolers. I didn't go above this. You can find this information in many places. But they have a more clearer understanding of death. They start to understand, okay, death is a permanent thing. We can't undo this. Older kids can even have a more adult understanding. They really are processing it on a more higher level. Some of the responses, again, still, they need those physical outlets of play to process their grief. They say that the energy you spend on the relationship with the person you love has to go somewhere after that person dies. So what do you do with that energy? Well, for a lot of kids, they play. For my husband, he became an ultramarathoner. He started running after our son died, and he kept running. It was like Forrest Gump. He didn't stop until he did the JFK 50-miler twice. Craziness, but I haven't had that problem. but it was his way, and I had to allow him to grieve his way. He needed that physical outlet. I needed to talk about it. I needed to surround myself with friends. I needed to be more social. Very different types of grieving styles. And the beauty in it is we had been married long enough, we understood each other enough that we could allow that. Some people will say, they're not grieving enough. They're not even crying. They're just running. She's grieving too much. Will the tears ever stop? It's just different. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's just different, and that has to be okay. Some kids may hang back socially and scholastically. We notice some grades dropping and other things just being more important. Some kids actually may act out. They just don't know what to do with all this energy and these grief feelings. There are some positive things we can do. There's something called older kid play therapy techniques. And again, it's just play is a child's grief work, and there's just different ways to go about that. The problem we had these two boys. The dad always wanted them to stay in public school. Mom wanted them to go to a Christian school. Well, Dad died. Mom puts them into a Christian school. I guess he died over the summer. So in the fall, they were put in a Christian school. Okay, one, surrounded by people they didn't really know, friends that didn't know what happened and things like that, and a much stricter environment. These kids were acting out. And every single time they acted out, the school's discipline policy was, they lose recess. Where's the grief going to go? These kids are now losing the only physical outlet for the grief they had. So we really had to talk to the mom and say, hey, you got to be in on that counselor. Yes, we need consistency. Yes, we need rules, but can they work with you within that structure? Because if they're not going to get it during school, then mom, can you put them in soccer? Can you put them in some other activity after school? This energy has to go somewhere, and that just wasn't happening in that environment. But again, where some people would say, well, she probably shouldn't have just taken it. She did, okay? She did the best she could in the situation she was given, and we have to go with that. We're not judging. We're not saying, well, pull them back out of school again. No, we made that decision. Okay, how do we work with this, and how do we make it work for that family? Okay, there are a lot of factors that influence grief. The type of loss, was it an accident? Was it a terminal illness? Was it a suicide? What was the mode of death? Well, I guess type of loss, was it parent? Was it grandparent? Was it sibling? Mode of death, how did it happen? How did some of the other family members react? Sometimes there's a lot of blame, there's a lot of nitpicking, there's a lot of people interjecting what they think should happen. And we have a fun saying in my bereaved parents group, don't should on me, I'm a bereaved parent. A lot of people in the face of loss want to tell you what you should do. Well, you should do this. Well, you should do that. Well, you shouldn't. Don't tell me what I should do. Step back, just let me do what I think I need to do for my family and support me in those decisions the best you can. And hopefully you're surrounded by positivity, guidance, encouragement, support that will lead you to the right decisions for your family, but it's always going to be different for every family. And we have a lot of people that think they know your business, and they don't always. Characteristics of the deceased. In some cases in this society, it used to be grandma and grandpa might have lived in the home. They might have lived next door. Now they might have lived in California. So where, a parent might be deeply grieving, the kid may be seemingly unaffected. Well, in some cases, they didn't even know the deceased. So they shouldn't be expected to grieve as deeply if that relationship wasn't as close. Whereas maybe the next door neighbor was the grandma figure. They die. Well, they're grieving more for them than their own grandma. Yeah, it's the relationship. Characteristics of the child. Is your child an introvert? Is your child an extrovert? Does your child love to play? Does your child love to create art? Is your child musically inclined? The characteristics of the kid can affect how they grieve and how you want to help them with that. And then we have some major problems come in with changes in the family living situation. There's no life insurance. Well, now the primary breadwinner is gone. Oh, well, now we have to move to be closer to family because we can't afford our house. Maybe mom never worked and the breadwinner died. But we've had families, they just have to up and move because they need that family support at this time of crisis. So there's a lot of secondary losses that sometimes come with the death. So some of the things you may hear from little kids is, did I cause it? And again, we touched on that earlier. I said that I wish my baby brother would get back where he came from, and now he's dead. Did I cause that? We need to help kids talk through, or, again, use art play. Is it going to happen to me? That's a valid question. If somebody within your family gets sick, and then they go to a hospital, and then they never come home, and then the kid breaks their arm a few months later and goes to the hospital, on that ride to the hospital, you think they aren't thinking, I might not come home. Grandpa went to the hospital, he never came back. So we never know, where those triggers come from, and we need to become more comfortable explaining to kids, how does death occur? What are these situations? What happens? So that they don't have to worry. And then we also have a question of who's going to take care of me, especially in the case of a parent loss. We had a young lady come through our program, and her father had passed away in an accident, and mom was rather young, actually, but she had had several heart attacks. And the child was getting more anxious, and I'm thinking, and rightfully so. And we had to say to them, Mom, she needs to know if the worst does happen and you die too, where will she go? And we said to her, if you would like to sit and have that conversation here, while there are people here to support you and help you talk through that conversation, we're happy to do that with you. But that's an important question. What will happen to me, especially in the case of parent loss? So to help children understand death, you really need to talk them through the concepts of death. It is irreversible. All life functions end completely at the time of death. Everything that's alive eventually dies, and there are physical reasons that someone dies. There are some great books to help explain that. I brought them with me, so if afterwards any of you wanted to look at them. Lifetimes is great. I just absolutely love it. I'll read you a quick excerpt from it because I think it's so great. And it's just beautifully illustrated too. It says, nothing that is alive goes on living forever. How long it lives depends upon what it is and what happens while it's living. Sometimes living things become ill or they get hurt. Mostly, of course, they get better again, but there are times when they are so badly hurt or they are so ill that they die because they can no longer stay alive. This can happen when they are young or old or anywhere in between. And they have just, beautiful illustrations the whole way through, but it talks about it's plants, it's animals, it's people, it's all these different things. There's a beginning, there's an end, and in the between there's living. And it's just a really beautiful book. There's other ones, When Dinosaurs Die, A Guide to Understanding Death. What's Dead? It's dead as this, dead as that. That's what it means to be dead. These are, it seems odd, but I'll tell you what, you start reading them with kids maybe even before a major loss occurs. You want them to gain some comfort with the topic because at some point they are not going to be under your guidance and under your wing. Where will they learn this stuff from if somebody does not teach it to them? So how to offer support to a grieving child. We're going to, in our forum, I think we're going to get to some of these things so I don't have to go too in depth. But like the funeral, a lot of people want to know, should I take my child to the funeral? Well, a lot of experts would say, let the child decide. Some people, you read about people years ago who were sort of forced into the casket to kiss grandpa, and they are, for decades, they are traumatized by that. They weren't allowed that. But when you choose to allow it, and maybe you have a family friend sitting with the child, if they get anxious or upset during the funeral, that person can take them out. There's actually a story, I was reading a great book. when John F. Kennedy died, John he didn't become anxious or upset. He just became a 3-year-old in the midst of the funeral, and a Secret Service agent took him out in the vestibule to play with him until the service was over. It allowed the family to focus on what they needed to, and it allowed a little kid with a lot of energy to get out of that situation. And even after Jackie had even asked for a shorter mass and everything, because she knew, the kids were involved, he still had sort of too much energy for that setting. But, there was somebody else outside the family that was comfortable with leaving. Delayed grieving and grief triggers we had touched on before. Children will re-grieve. Sometimes, and I thought this was one of the more interesting ones, a child who has lost a parent can delay their grieving for a long time. We're talking in some cases up to several years. And what will sometimes happen is when the surviving parent finally enters into a new relationship, the child will then start grieving because they see, okay, let's say dad died. Mom's okay now. She's moving forward with her life. I can now grieve. But what's mom think? Oh, my kids hate the new guy. Not necessarily. They might. But they could just be starting to grieve because they had to be strong for mom. Mom was upset. They didn't want to overburden mom. And they can do that subconsciously. They don't even have to really be thinking about it. Grief triggers, again, things like donuts with dad. Maybe if you're in a position of authority, you could change some of this stuff to be a little more sympathetic. Re-grieving developmentally, play as a child's grief work. Don't assume your child's school counselor is a grief expert. Like I said, many of them are not trained in it. You might have to seek out help for your child with local support groups and camps. Educate yourself about grief. Again, tons of resources out there. Lots of books. There's online resources. The more educated you are before a loss occurs, the better off you'll be, because trust me, when you're grieving, sometimes the last thing you want to do is look for resources, look for books. You're just struggling to make it through each day, trying to remember to eat and to do, daily types of things. Again, teaching your child about grief, one of the great ways to do this is to participate in the activities of Children's Grief Awareness Day. It's the third Thursday of November. The symbol's the blue butterfly, Hope the butterfly. You can take pictures with Hope. You can print Hope off, and you can take Hope around the globe with you and everything. They have stickers. I read this book. I had a special children's evening story time at our local library the night before Children's Grief Awareness Day. We did a butterfly craft, and then I asked all the kids, I gave them stickers, and I told them they could wear the blue the next day to show their awareness for other grieving kids. And most of them were there because they had lost a pet, but they understood that people die too, and it just sort of puts the idea into their mind and lets them start talking through it. And then it takes a village. I'm going to give you one example from the Kennedy book, and then I have a final quote. But I love this, and I'll try to read it without crying. But it talks about how sometimes the family is so encompassed in their own grief that it really takes other people. Like I had told you, people took my daughter and did all sorts of stuff with her because I really just couldn't. Caroline Kennedy, 6 years old, was not having a good day. Her father, the President of the United States, assassinated in Dallas, was being buried with all the pomp and ceremony a grieving nation could muster. She rode with her brother John and her nanny, Maud Shaw, in the back seat of a limousine, slowly making its way towards St. Matthew's Cathedral. Her mother and uncles, Robert and Ted, and numerous world leaders were walking in front of the limousine. Carolyn looked out the window and recognized Robert Foster, a Secret Service agent. She rolled down the window and stuck out her hand, and the agent took it and held it tightly all the way to the church. Agent Foster later said that it was all he could do to keep from bursting into tears. That day, a Secret Service agent made all the difference for a 6-year-old girl. You do not have to be a Secret Service agent to make a difference. The child does not have to be the daughter of a president. You simply have to be willing to be interrupted for the sake of a grieving child. You can make a difference in a child's integration of the loss and how that initial loss will impact all other losses. You simply have to have eyes open to small hands sticking out of limousine windows. I just loved that. And I think the fact that you guys are here tonight shows that you are willing to take that small hand and to learn more about a topic that many people just aren't comfortable discussing. I just have one final quote. Again, it's from the same book. This is a great book. When a Child You Love is Grieving by a gentleman named Harold Ivan Smith. I think part of why I love this book, too, is his research really focuses on the grief of U.S. presidents and first ladies. This is fascinating. The different people and their grief, all the presidents who lost fathers before they were even born, people who lost their parents, like Condoleezza Rice and the grief she experienced during the Birmingham bombings. I mean, it's just amazing because he makes it really practical and real, so I would suggest that. But he says, and I love his quote, "It's not so much what happens to the child, but how the child and the adults in the child's life interpret and reinterpret the death or loss, and how those adults recognize the child's need to mourn on the child's time framework." So thank you so much. I'm really interested in hearing more of your questions and from the panelists. But thank you again for being here and being willing to take that small hand in yours and guide children through the grief journey. It's just so important. Thank you.